Welcome back to episode 11. I sit here with Bhavani Maki, and it's just such a great honor and a great joy to have these conversations with you, my teacher and my mentor. And I just want to put a little plug out to all the folks to please consider leaving a 5-star review and writing a little something for the podcast. This is how the word gets out about the Yogi's Roadmap podcast, and it would mean so much to us if you would do that. So,
and hopefully mean a lot to others because, I know if finding what fits you is finding, as my son would say, a hay and a needle stack, or a thread and a needle stack. So there are people who are yearning for this. And it's hard to find it in the spiritual marketplace, which is very busy. There's a lot of commotion. So yeah.
Yay.
Thanks for that.
Yeah. Also, visit bhavanimaki.com for the latest classes and happenings, both Kauai and online. It's a one-of-a-kind experience. I speak from personal experience to sit in the presence of someone who really walks their talk. So without further ado.
No pressure there.
No pressure. It's really great to be here with you again.
Thanks, Janae.
Yeah. So my question for you is, what are these times asking of us as citizens of our locale and as, practitioners of yoga?
Yoga, what it does is it's the remembrance of our resilience, and that there are forces that are larger than us that are colluding. And rather than kind of like resisting that flow, even the word grace, anugraha, graha means dwelling, and anu means kind of like, well, what's the next step? And it's that sense of the nectar. So, so much of the time we have our blueprint of how things should unfold. And there's a greater unfolding that's happening within us. Instinctively, we cling to comfort. There's, of course, sutra on this. Even the wisest of sages has this biological impulse. But how we can participate in this unfolding of evolution, the uncrumpling of consciousness, and to really, start to pay attention to the marks, the signs, the omens along the way, so that we're receiving the transmission. And it's scary because as much as we want to have a map is 2-dimensional. So, it's really about not getting from point A to B, but about feeling your own resilience and feeling the magic in the moment. So that's a very kind of like, esoteric answer. The exoteric experience is that, we have our real desires, and the realization of what is like a lasting desire and what is maybe, kind of like a concocted idea or a concept is going to be the experience of our own fulfillment. And sometimes it's a dream that we can't like articulate, but it's that unfolding of the dream. So these crises, remember that word kiki, and it's a Japanese word. I remember speaking to a Japanese woman because I heard it from my teacher, Rama. And she said that it's, a crisis that presents an opportunity. And oftentimes we won't make that shift or that leap of faith unless it's a critical moment. We procrastinate, we prolong, we self-negate, we undermine ourselves, we distract ourselves. So, when I asked this woman in Paris, she was in Montpellier, and she was, an avid student of yoga. And in her kind of like, French was her second language. French was my fourth language. So we managed to kind of communicate, but really it was on a deeper level. And she said, well, Kiki, there's many different definitions. And first she said it's the left-handed path. So when I think about that, when I feel into that, assuming that you're right-handed, which isn't necessarily the case, but it's kind of the less dominant side. So it's like, doing things maybe from using another part of your being that is less accessible, where there's less transmission, where there's less development. And then I said, well, does it mean something else? And she amended this, point of view that Rama shared. And she said, it's when you're looking in hindsight at something that you thought was going to be your undoing. And you realize that where you are here today is because of that experience, that you were able to discover parts of yourself that would have otherwise remained hidden. So life is going to do that. It's kind of like a pressure cooker that's going to, when we look at nature, nature's always adapting. It's always varying. And when it has something difficult, there's a difficult experience, dvesha, it will try to move away from it if it's not necessary, but without ego involvement, without the psychological narrative that underscores so much of what's going on. So it's natural that we're going to avoid, what is painful, but when there's pain that is really, part of fostering our growth and our creativity, we can relax into it. So there's nothing but trouble and nothing but problems for us to face. And sometimes, just by recognizing that the life is a series of thresholds in which we face the very real conditions of suffering, that these are those defining moments, Hatha Yoga Anushasanam, in which we're going to have that breakthrough experience. And yes, it's going to take us off the well-trodden path. And this even includes the well-worn path of our excuses, our procrastination, our outworn and outdated defense mechanisms, and really, shifting the animal of our body to one that is conducive, that's ready to seize opportunity. And it may not be perfect, but it can be something special. So I really feel that, because of the level of attunement that we experience, this is the pain of sattva, where we feel the human condition. We have a sense of compassion and we have a sense of empathy. Yoga is self-care, and it's taking time to invest in what we care about. When we're fostering that love, the loving vibration, the coherency of our system, of our inner state, recognizing, I'd rather not be washing toilets, but I like to sit on a clean toilet. It's temporary. As once it's clean, it's going to be temporary. This is necessary. This is part of life. Such a mundane example. That, through our, through the self-care, through the compassion for ourselves, we actually, hold that field for others. So really how we experience the world on the outside depends 100% on how we feel on the inside. And that's the good news, because we don't have as much, leverage in the outer world as we do in the inner world. So can we, cultivate that state so that when we face those thresholds, something beautiful can be happening or happen.
Thank you so much. That's gives me hope.
The only thing to not escape Pandora's box.
Yeah. Yeah, and more than hope, sometimes, hope is a little bit trite, but it's really like something to sink my teeth into. And you were mentioning this left-handed path, and often people speak about Tantra as the left-handed path. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Well, Dr. Robert Svoboda wrote a wonderful book on that, the Agori, the left-handed path. And, um, it's said to be the quicker path, but it's very dangerous because so many people just go insane on it. And this is where you, radically embrace what you have disdain for and disgust for. So, like traditionally, the left-handed path, you would be living in a crematorium or in a burial site. You smear the ashes of the corpses, on your body. You live naked. You don't have family ties. You eat your food out of the cranium of a corpse. It's a pretty radical existence. So most of us aren't going to take that path. And it's not exactly synonymous with what, kiki means. I'm sure we can draw corollaries where, in our lineage, Shanae, through Krishnamacharya, it's the householder lineage. So this is where, we live in the world and we're integrating our humanity into the spiritual experience. There's very rare and unique souls, vairagis, who come into this life and they don't have a desire for the creature comforts. They don't have a desire for an intimate relationship with another human being, or for even becoming a parent on their own. And they're very unique, right? It's a very, very niche kind of a thing. And it's something that, you're just born that way. For most of us, it's about, like as Krishnamacharya's lineage, it's about bringing it into culture, integrating the spirituality into culture. There's not a dichotomy. So, how can we use spiritual practices in order to make us more available for loving? And we can see the macrocosm from the microcosm of our family system. As it says in the Gita, the hardest paths of yoga are being a mother. Doesn't mention father, by the way, which is interesting because, it's a pretty like male oriented text in a lot of ways, and also being a spouse. So, it takes some time to get that. We may be really functional in the world and functional on the yoga mat, but as far as those immediate relationships, that's like the real litmus test and the real opportunity. And if we can find harmony and respect in differences, that helps us to go out into the world. And it the culture of the family then percolates into the culture of the community, of the island, or of the nation, of the continent, and of the world.
Yeah, thank you for that distinction. So another question that's not on our list, but I want to take it a little further because my sense is that, for well, I'll speak for myself, is, the householder path is sounds really great. In the ideal is like you get to have really the best of all worlds. It's like finding time for one's formal practice and doing work in the world, maybe raising a family, whatever that happens to be, having a business, I'm not sure. And then there's the path of the ascetic. So, kind of removing oneself from the world, from, these daily tasks. And for me personally, that's never been really appealing because I want it all. I want it all right now. And Maybe you can speak a little bit more about Krishnamacharya's lineage and this householder path.
You know, again, it's like there is a place and there is a function for these mendicants, monks, hermits, nuns, and in different cultures, it's like the community supports that. And a lot of those, they're able to live independently. Now, many aren't. And there is, it's like we're not isolated. So now suddenly, there's a mother superior or a father superior. And as soon as we become institutionalized, there's going to be kind of politics and agendas and hierarchies. That's not always true. I feel like, there really isn't an avoidance. You can't get away from it. You can't. So there's complexities in both situations. But, it was Ramamohan Brahmacharya, who I shared earlier, who after, Krishnamacharya basically begged him to teach him, and he wasn't taking students. And in the tradition of yoga, the teacher exacted the payment at the end of the tenure of their training. And he said, I want you to have children, because this is the evolution of our culture and our society. And as much as we, maybe want to create a bubble around ourselves and be separate, this is where we're really, as it said, like we stand on the shoulders of our ancestors, that the children inherit our nervous system. So, what is that minuscule demographic of people who are able to live a solitary life without the structure of spiritual community and hierarchy? It's like you have to live somewhere where it's favorable, where you're not going to be kicked off the land for squatting or trespassing, where there's food. There's a lot of complexities in that, or have such like a skill in these esoteric practices where you're doing something like tumal, as the Tibetan monks do, where they, are able to generate internal heat and live in sub-zero temperatures where they're above the tree line and there isn't even fuel, so there's austerities no matter where you're going to be. So, dealing with, the larger context, and how, it's also about like, it's our nature to want to keep our species going, right? To have that sense of thriving and of engaging, and the human experience. So living in the world is where we do that, and we're kind of paying it forward. I remember having this moment, and it was probably a real moment of humility and of spiritual awakening. And I'm not calling myself humble, but it was humbling to realize that everything that I thought that I had accomplished was really from my grandmother, that she had really paved the way so that I could have the liberty and the self-agency to do things different, etc. And that even the things that I'm doing today, sure, I might experience a smattering of the efforts that I've made, but really I'm doing it for the love of the future generations. That, just in my own family of origin, one of the most like gratifying moments was when my son was afraid and he ran up and hugged me because he wanted to seek solace and safety and comfort. And I didn't have that in my childhood. I was usually running from my parents. So that was just like, that was so, it was like such a healing for my spirit and my soul to create a culture in which my son felt that way. And then to see his ability to have deep empathy and compassion and also be true to himself. It's really yoga is a grassroots system. So we do that work on the inside. We do it within the family, because the family, there's really no escape, right? You can punch in, you can punch out, go back into your bubble when you're going to work. But when you come home is where like the real raw self gets revealed. So Krishnamacharya, he furthered that, and he supported what his teacher asked of him. He was really kind of like being groomed to be the head of this monastic community, and he had tenure and financial security, but now he had to take on a wife. And we already know, like the push me, pull me in relationship, where one wants more intimacy, one wants more space, and it flip-flops. And the different desires and ideals and perspectives and wounds. And it's really a way of, bringing the complexity of the world into the hearth, into the heart. And that's where yoga to me is really pragmatic. So as much as we need, these mendicants and these monks meditating and holding a spiritual vibration, it's really about our humanity and that natural evolution, which requires that it's intergenerational healing. It's very interesting. It's said that there's, in like some of the more esoteric teachings of yoga, that there's the element of, let me see if I can get this straight. There's the Rishi Yogi and there's the Devas. And so where the yogi is kind of like focused on Lord Shiva, who's sitting above the tree line, where everything is frozen. So there's no creation, there's no past, present, or future. It's in a place of stasis. And they're doing this to like control the waves, the vritti of creation. The devas are constantly trying to thwart that, because their natural essence is about creation. And we might even think about like, oh, here's this little spermatozoa, which is having to forge its way through the labyrinth of the uterus and up into the fallopian tube, and then it has to, there's almost like this, take it in context, but it has to like penetrate the ovum, right? So there's, this kind of like collision and separation and polarities of coming together, and then the cells, reproducing to create this organism. So these polarities are, like Albert Einstein said, the magnetic field that we live in. So where the Rishi Yogi is trying to freeze time and space and come into that place of nirguna, which is where all of the protons, neutrons, and electrons are in a state of equilibrium, and there's no interaction. The devas, the nature spirits, are trying to stir up creation, because creation is the magic and the beauty of dynamic awareness. So what is kind of more static? What is dynamic? And we need to be careful that we don't make one right or wrong. It's just, we kind of come into the world. Some people might call it karma, you might call it whatever, but we come in the way that we are, and to really to listen to that and feel into it.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's just being able to get that pull, because sometimes, yes, as you were talking, I realized that sometimes that path of asceticism seems much more easy, in air quotes, to be able to just renounce the world and give everything up and, sit there and meditate. And they both have their challenges and their dynamics. And it's like you said, it's about, what we're here to do.
Yeah, and really listening to, and listen, we may go into periods of, when we're living more internally and kind of fostering our own, spiritual practices and path. And then we go into a householder phase, and then, that relationship may dissolve for various reasons. So it's not a straight line. We don't know. That's the nature of the seasons of our life that we're going to go through. But really to see where our concepts are, not really touching our own heart and our own soul. So that's where the emotions are how we evolve, because they provide feedback. So we have to be careful that our ideas don't get in the way of just the raw experience, of the true experience. And it's like that spermatozoa, being able to crack through the ideas that can actually form accretions around our heart, and really being able to sit with that stuff and also know that, like, there's going to be interior yearnings. We've spoken at this, we've touched on it at length, but the fact that you have desire is a beautiful thing.
Thank you. So something that keeps coming up for me is this title of yoga teacher. Because in my experience, there's so much variance in the yoga scene, like goat yoga, chocolate yoga, whatever, weekend teacher trainings and the rest. And I'm wondering if you can help clarify the role of yoga practitioner and teacher of yoga, different and the same.
Yeah. That's a really rich and salient question. So as far as being a teacher, it really comes from being a student. And I just received one of the most beautiful compliments that I've ever received. I was teaching in Half Moon Bay, and Natalie Hansen, who I've been working with for about 20 years, when she introduced me to the group, she said, Bhavani is one of the most incredible students of yoga that I've ever met. And I was like, I just wanted to weep, because that's really where I'm at. And, I'm really curious about yoga. First, because I was suffering so deeply, and from my own personal familial experience, and how could I find coherency? I knew that there was something more than this endless, vicious cycle of pain and these ideals in which I never measured up. So much of it, was just the physical healing from my own injuries, my emotional healing, my psychological healing. So that's where I came from, was really being in touch with my pain. And then, just being really curious about that. So the more it's like you're learning, the more these rabbit holes and the question becomes more refined. And I don't feel like I'm coming from my pain anymore, but I'm just coming from, this love of learning. So, depending on the student and where they're at, being able to meet the student where they're at and to reflect back to them that these desires are really real, and to get in touch with those desires and to share that love of self-discovery, of finding coherency in what appears to the unexamined consciousness as chaos, and supporting them in developing their acumen for learning and curiosity. So my teacher, and it's really interesting, Krishnamacharya said this, and my husband, who came from another lineage, Anandamurti, they said, we teach to learn. So I even had teachers in my, primary and secondary schooling who taught subjects that I wasn't particularly interested in. But because of their joy of learning, it was so effusive. It excited me. And it was really, sharing that joy with another person. So helping them to learn how to discern, how to connect with themselves, to develop confidence in themselves, to really learn about transmission, in their own bodies. The senses are said to be the gateways of consciousness. So to develop clear perception, to understand the foundations of yoga, to understand that, once they get those foundations, that there's so many possibilities, there's more than one way to go. And you're really there to lift the student up. Abhyasa is to check the downward pull. And this comes from, understanding your own psychology, your own character strengths and weaknesses, and helping that other person to appreciate that as well. For some, we have to rein them back. For others, we might have to light a fire underneath them to help them to become more clear in their priorities, to inspire them to develop, competence and confidence, the sense of being committed and invested, that you commit yourself to. Of course, a student, needs to reciprocate. And if they're reciprocating and you're committed with clear boundaries, it's like you lift each other up. So, having respect for that student, a lot of times, we don't maybe have those kind of mentor relationships in our usual educational experiences. And many of us feel like we were born into families of real dysfunction. So how we can develop a healthy, reciprocal relationship. That's what I feel like we're really sharing with the student is to trust in their own capacity to, learn a system, but then become more eclectic and pragmatic so that it's integrated into the life experience. Otherwise, why are we even doing yoga?
Yeah, that. Yep. Thank you. So let me say it this way. You're also a student of astrology. And can you speak more about the science of yoga and the science of astrology as they inform our lives in a pragmatic way? Many people know of the occult sciences, astrology being one of them, and the rhetoric is sort of chalking them up to be a little woo-woo. And yet, in my experience of both yoga and astrology, is that the implementation and the practice of these long-established sciences are really far from out there. They're very grounded in an embodied way. And I'm wondering if you can speak more about that.
Yeah. So, God, there's so many layers to this. And when we look at the Yoga Sutra as Yogas Chitta Vritti Nirodha, The vritti are the oscillations, not only of consciousness, but it's the way that creation expresses herself. Okay, the creatrix. And it said that, all of creation is in response to the creator's question, who am I? So the vritti, we can see it as the movement of the celestial bodies. We can see it as the movement of the wind, of the elements, of our own thought waves, of our own emotions. That when we find our central axis, it's kind of like finding Hokulea, which was the Polaris, the northern star for the Polynesian navigators. You have a sense of where you are in the context of this, ocean of creation. So there's all these different movements, and movement isn't just something that we do, it's who we are. It's how we feel ourselves as a gravitational field held within a larger gravitational field. So astrology, sometimes people will have magical thinking or spiritual bypassing. Oh, well, I have, this retrograde or, this square in my planet, or I'm going through this transit. And so there's nothing that I can do about it. They're really missing the point. The point is, we can see this when we're looking at infants. Okay, there's developmental phases. When we understand that these developmental phases, they present throughout our life, the celestial body, it's just like we could take, a sample of our blood and get a sense of what's happening in the larger system. We're not disconnected from the cosmos in the same way that the phases of the moon pull on the tides of the earth. And, women, we experience these phases in our own lunar cycle. It's self-evident that there's magnetic fields that are pulling on us, and it's part of this larger cycle. So it's just very interesting to have this other kind of it's an objective perspective of our subjective experience. So I remember, I grew up in the 70s, and I remember there was this little, it was like a Rexall drugs or something, and they used incense was big then, and there'd be ones for different astrological signs. And part of the fad of the time was, what sign are you? So, oh, well, this is my sign, and this, oh, well, you're an Aries, so you're just this way. And, that always kind of rubbed me the wrong way. I was like, okay, there's truth in that, but I'm so much more. So I developed kind of just a real sophomoric interest. And then I became more curious about it. And I remember drawing charts. I must have been about 18 or 19 at the time. And I did charts for everyone in my immediate family. And then you look up in these books, okay, well, what is sun in the fourth house and this sign squaring moon in the, whatever house. And you look it up, and it was just so insightful and so accurate. And I thought, my God, this is amazing. This isn't speaking to somebody who knows about me and about my history. Wow, how can this be? And it's kind of like one of these mysteries that, people were so in touch and were studying the stars, and like yoga, it was a transmission that occurred. How do we find anything? So that was really interesting to me. And usually, what I've discovered is when I look into my chart or somebody asks me to do a reading for them, it's no coincidence. There's pressures, there's tensions that are happening, and it can help us to relax into that experience. Okay, I'm in Uranus opposition, approximately 41, 42, midlife crises. So we might have it within our colloquial understanding, oh, this person's going through midlife crises. But then we look at it and we can look at the houses and we can see, all right, well, this is triggering this in my chart. And these are real opportunities to reevaluate this aspect of my life. And this is either going to break me or it's going to, help me to reorder my priorities. This is again that crisis/opportunity. Or let's say around 49, 48 to 52, it depends. You're in your Chiron return. As we get older, there's less of these significant transits with the outer planets. The next big one would be our next Saturn return and our Uranus conjunction, which happens in our 80s. At around 50 and around the Saturn return, which would be around 56, 57, these are points when people really make a shift and they get in touch. Like, what have I been doing? Am I going to fall? Am I going to crumble or melt down into the sense of, like, I had these ideas of what fulfillment were. Maybe I've achieved them, but I still have deeper longings. It's a real turning point in your life. And you'll see either people start to really age and dvesha, they start to like divide themselves from the life force. They get out of that anugraha of the flow of reinventing themselves. And maybe that reinvention is even taking like a different kind of personal inventory. Like, I thought this was important, but look what I have. Or, this is really valuable. Or I spent all this energy investing in this, thinking it was important, but really this is what I'm longing for. So we can use it as another window to get a sense of where our development is happening on a more interior level. So the stars, the astral bodies, they're not defining what's going on. It's merely another perspective, in the same way that an Ayurvedic practitioner might read your different pulses. It's another way of getting a pulse on where you are in your evolution. And you're like, okay, right now I'm facing this wound. I'm, Chiron return. Thank God it's in my 9th house. This is where I can really work on my philosophy, my epistemology of life. Or, oh my God, it's happening in my 10th house. This is where I'm out in the world and my career and my work. And, I need to be careful. I need to be even more self-aware, because I could really be crucified. What I'm doing could be misconstrued. I have to be that much more precise and that much more aware of my environment. So or maybe it's in my 6th house. I need to be really aware about my personal health, my physical body. There might be, like, I might be setting up precursors for real health crisis. So it's just, it's not defining, but it offers perspectives as far as what's going on in your life. And then we don't, in some ways, we don't have to take it so personally. We can just see, all right, this is natural. This is the cycle that I'm in, and I have choices.
And isn't it so similar with yoga also? I find that sometimes it's like you have to have the physical experience, but it's evidence-based. When you actually do these practices, it's like, oh, I am actually in greater alignment. Oh, I am able to breathe better. Oh, wow, this, physical, pain, or, the stitch on my side, it's gone. Or like, even like, wow, I'm able to be a little bit more spacious with the people in my family. How cool.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's like when you make a shift, it's going to show up in every area of your life. So that's where I love, the yoga practice is really dealing with our own constellation of cells, of stories, the relationships between our systems. And then we can see it mirrored out in the cosmos as well, where, astrology is wonderful. And we can make a shift in our mind. And sometimes that will be profound enough where we can penetrate ourselves. But yeah, I mean, I'm a wholehearted believer in yoga as far as like really paying attention to our own body of wisdom.
That's a wonderful place to end for today.
Thanks, Shanae, for
Thank you.
your questions are so juicy.
Great. I'm so
Sucking on the
glad.
juice over here.
Us too on this end.
Right on.
Thanks, Bhavani.
Namaskara.
Namaste.